On paper, they were perfect. A young family with two beautiful daughters, a baby boy on the way, a 5-bedroom home nestled in suburban Colorado, surrounded by neighbors who waved and smiled. Online, she was radiant, thriving in her career, documenting every moment of motherhood, of marriage, of gratitude. But sometimes perfection is a mask, and just beneath it, something darker waits to break through the cracks. This is the case of Shannan Watts and how a husband went from a quiet father to a cold-blooded killer. Let's investigate. In every murder investigation, one question guides everything. Who had the motive, the means, and the opportunity? It's the question detectives ask when the trail runs cold. It's what turns random evidence into a case and a suspect into a killer. In today's story, we're breaking down a case that seemed picture perfect on the outside. But when the truth came out, it was fueled by obsession, jealousy, and premeditated violence. This is not just a story about murder. It's about control, about rage, about what happens when fame and ego collide and someone doesn't walk away. Let's investigate. Shannan Watts lived her life out loud. She was vibrant, driven, and deeply devoted to her family. If you followed her on Facebook, you saw it all. Her love for her husband, Chris, her joy in raising Bella and Celeste, her pride in being a soon-to-be mother of 3. "I love this man," she wrote. "He's my rock. He's everything I could have asked for." Videos showed a smiling Chris making cookies with the girls, lifting them into his arms, wrapping them in warmth. But the camera only shows what we choose to capture, and behind the lens, things were beginning to fall apart. They met in 2010, married by 2012, bought a home, had 2 daughters, and by 2018, another child on the way. The house was beautiful, the pictures were perfect, but they were also bankrupt. In 2015, the Watts family filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, a sign of financial stress hiding behind a polished image. Shannan left her job at a children's hospital to sell health products online, and she was good at it. Her social media reflected success and stability, but it also became her stage, her way to keep the dream alive, even when Chris started to disappear emotionally. Friends remember her saying, "Something's wrong. He's not affectionate anymore." Chris, once the smiling husband, had grown cold, distant. He was quiet, unavailable. Shannan thought maybe it was stress, or the baby. But the truth? He had started an affair with a coworker, and in that summer of 2018, the lie began to harden into something far more dangerous. Chris Watts wasn't loud. He wasn't angry. He wasn't the man people thought of as dangerous. That's what made it worse. Born in North Carolina, raised in what seemed like an average home, Chris had no violent past, no arrest record, no big red flags. He worked in the oil fields, long shifts, early mornings, a man of routine. But what experts would later say is that he fit the profile of a family annihilator, someone who appears calm and passive, but who builds up rage silently until it explodes. By July 2018, Chris Watts was living a double life. One with Shannan, his children, and the illusion of family. The other with his mistress, where he spoke of freedom, new beginnings, and a life without burden. And soon in his mind, that burden became his wife, his daughters, his unborn son. On the night of August 12th, 2018, Shannan returned home from a business trip. She walked into her house at 1:48 a.m. She was 15 weeks pregnant. Within hours, she was dead. According to Chris's later confession, they argued, and in the early hours of that morning, he strangled her in their bedroom. Then he loaded her body into his truck, placed his daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, in the back seat, and drove them, alive, to an oil site he worked at. What happened next is beyond words. There, he ended the lives of both girls and disposed of their bodies. Shannan and her unborn baby boy, Nico, were buried in a shallow grave nearby. It started with silence. That same day, Shannan Watts missed a doctor's appointment. She didn't return calls, didn't text back. For someone constantly connected, it was immediately alarming. Her friend Nicole Atkinson, was the last person to see her. She had dropped Shannan off at home from a business trip just hours before. When Shannan didn't respond the next morning, Nickel knew something was wrong. She called, she texted, no answer. By mid-morning, she drove to the Watts home in Frederick, Colorado. The front door was locked. Shannan's car was still in the garage, baby car seats untouched. Her purse, phone, and keys inside. But there was no sign of Shannan or the girls. That's when Nickel made the call to 911. The call would be the first crack in Chris Watts' carefully constructed lie, and it came from someone who knew Shannan, not just online, but in real life, a friend who knew silence wasn't like her and who refused to accept it. Chris Watts lied to the police, to Shannan's friends, to the cameras. He appeared on news broadcasts, pleading for his family's return, but the walls were closing in. A failed polygraph, cell phone data, surveillance footage, and then a full confession. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to 9 felony counts, including the murder of his pregnant wife and children. He is now serving 5 life sentences without parole. But even behind bars, the shock hasn't faded, because what haunts us isn't just the crime, it's how hidden it was beneath the surface. Shannan's posts seemed full of joy, but they were also full of effort. Behind every smile, she was holding the pieces together. Behind every tribute to Chris was a growing fear he was slipping away. These are the signs so many miss. A partner who emotionally vanishes, the sudden shift in affection, the public praise masking private tension, the secrecy, the detachment, the affair. Sometimes danger doesn't look angry. Sometimes it looks quiet, calm, smiling. How does a man go from quiet husband to cold-blooded killer of his entire family? Chris Watts didn't fit the stereotype. He wasn't loud, he wasn't aggressive. But behind that calm exterior, experts say, the danger was hiding in plain sight. In criminal psychology, Chris Watts fits the clinical pattern of what's known as a family annihilator. This is a specific, rare type of offender, usually male, often in his 30s or 40s, who appears outwardly stable until he kills his entire family. The motive? Control, image, escape. Not outbursts, not temporary rage, but calculated erasure. Watts showed classic red flags that many miss until it's too late. In the months before the murders, Shannan told friends Chris had changed. He was no longer affectionate. He seemed absent, even when he was physically there. This is a key early warning sign: emotional disengagement. Forensic psychologists note that when a partner detaches without explanation, especially in a tightly bonded family, it's often a sign that they've mentally checked out of the relationship or already envisioned life beyond it. During the summer of 2018, Chris began an affair with a coworker. This was more than infidelity. In the mind of a family annihilator, the affair often represents a fantasy life. Freedom, control, youth, possibility. But instead of facing consequences, Watts chose to erase the life that stood in the way. Psychologists call this black and white cognition, a distorted thinking where the only options become keep the lie or kill the truth. Watts wasn't just escaping responsibility, he was escaping exposure. He knew the public image, the doting dad, the loving husband, the suburban provider, and that image was crumbling. For men like Watts, that loss of control, of perception, can trigger violence. Not out of hate, but out of a desperate need to maintain the illusion that they are good. He didn't rage, he calculated, and that's what makes him especially dangerous. Even after killing his pregnant wife and daughters, Chris Watts gave a calm TV interview, smiling nervously, saying he hoped they would come back. Psychologists point to this as classic dissociation, a mental disconnect between his actions and his narrative. He wasn't just lying to the world, he was still trying to lie to himself. That ability to commit such horror and then act normal, that's not just guilt, that's psychological compartmentalization, a sign of deeply fractured morality. What's terrifying is not just what Chris did, but how normal he appeared while doing it. What happened to Shannan wasn't random. It wasn't senseless. It was the end result of choices, red flags, and warnings that were ignored. Not just by her, but by all of us. And if even one person can learn from her story, then maybe this isn't just a case file. It's a call to see the signs and speak before it's too late. How does a man go from quiet husband to cold-blooded killer of his entire family? Chris Watts didn't fit the stereotype. He wasn't loud, he wasn't aggressive, but behind that calm exterior, experts say, the danger was hiding in plain sight. In criminal psychology, Chris Watts fits the clinical pattern of what's known as a family annihilator. This is a specific, rare type of offender, usually male, often in his 30s or 40s, who appears outwardly stable until he kills his entire family. The motive? Control, image, escape, not outbursts, not temporary rage, but calculated erasure. Watts showed classic red flags that many miss until it's too late. Shannan Watts should be here today. Bella should be 10. Celeste should be 8. Baby Nico should have had a chance to be born. But one man's choice, one horrifying, calculated act, ended it all. This isn't just a story of tragedy. It's a story of warning. If you or someone you know feels unsafe, emotionally, mentally, or physically, please reach out. You are not alone. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE or visit www.thehotline.org for confidential help. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, help us share Shannan's legacy. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more cases that deserve to be told. Not just to remember, but to protect those still here.